Welcome back to Media 7. We're discussing the police PR battle with Graham Bell, Dominic Andre and Phil Kitchen. We have another group of South Auckland Vox Pops, this time on whether the police are doing a good job.
You know what the police's job? Not at all. To serve and protect. That's what they're supposed to do, serve and protect.
Sometimes they do their job and sometimes they don't.
Sometimes police are very racist.
With a lot of things happening in the community, you wonder whether there is a safe community out there with the police force.
They should be issued with more opportunities to give criminals a knock in the head.
They do good, they try to do their best, they've got that much of it.
I think they've got a real difficult job, and I think they're doing well.
Crime is rising, but the police are still doing their job.
They're doing the opposite. They're not serving, and they're doing fuck all protecting.
Gentlemen, I actually, before the show, actually looked up the most recent crime statistics for that district, Counties Manukau. The police there appear to have done a pretty good job last year. Homicides were down 70%, robberies were down.
The ridiculous thing is that there's this myth that crime's out of control in New Zealand. It is a problem, but on a world scale, New Zealand is a very, very safe society. Rapes and murders are still making the news here. In Los Angeles and New York and London, they've got to be something pretty unusual or horrible before they even make the news.
Phil, do you think we sometimes lose track of that? I mean, we get a spate of crimes.
No, I disagree. I think that we do sometimes report good police stories. I strongly disagree with that. I mean, I've written some stories that the police don't like, but I've also written a large number of stories that the police do like. But there is a tendency there has been a tendency in recent years that if the cops screw up, that they get bagged, and I think I think transparency is a good thing. I think sunlight's the best form of disinfectant, and I think if they do screw up, they should be held accountable just like anyone else that's on the taxpayer, that's being paid by the taxpayer.
Judy McGregor did some quite good research on this, matching the growth in crime reporting and the proportion of news that were actually crime stories against public perceptions of the crime rate. And she found that people actually believed that crime was rising and also that prison sentences were becoming lighter when the opposite was true in both cases. I mean, Dominic, do you think there are too many crime stories now?
No, I don't. It was Larry Lamb, who was the editorial director of The Sun in London, who said, of the basic things that people like in life, it's really sex and crime, and they really want to read a hell of a lot about crime. I don't think there is enough crime in some ways. There are good stories to be told from the victims' perspectives, and there are good stories from the cops' perspectives as well. But I think the media, this time last year, in fact, Tariana Turia was saying that the media had created a moral panic over the gang situation. And there is instances of stuff being taken on board, something is perceived as a threat to society, the media get hold of it, there are stereotypes and whatever, then frenzy in the public, it's whipped up, then the politicians get involved, and then there's the possibility of either this thing will go away or there'll be a social change.
Well, Tariana Turia was actually involved in something where just that happened. It was just involved a different sector. The terror raids in the Uraweras upset a very different sector of society. Do you think, to some extent, the police were their own worst enemies in that case? Because the reporting of that gradually swung around to the idea that the police had overreacted.
Well, it's easy to say that, isn't it? But what were the police to do? I mean, they had all this information. We've still had to hear the court cases. Once the court cases have been heard, then I'll be interested to see what comes out. Yeah. I want to say that I've been concerned for some years at the way what goes on in our courts is reported in the media, because the disquiet is not only over the acquittals, there is a lot of disquiet over a lot of convictions as well. And this is perpetrated by media people that go to these trials and only report the controversial or the confrontational issues that happen in the trial. So people that read about them and see them on TV think that's all that's happened in the courtroom, and they don't get to appreciate the totality of the evidence that's led to these convictions.
Well, this is precisely the same complaint that people make about the reporting of Parliament. Only the spectacle is reported.
We don't want to hear that, though, do we?
Another dimension to the terror raids was that the police seemed to be quite willing to work the media themselves. I mean, you might have a different view on this because you come from an era where, your mates in the police would actually pass you information, but I think that upset people too, the idea that the police were leaking on their own behalf.
But were they leaking?
Yes, I don't know if it would be called.
Were the police leaking? In actual fact, it wasn't the police that were leaking the most. It was the defence that was leaking the most. It was the defence lawyers that were actually making the most going on it. The defence lawyers were saying that these people were innocent. The defence lawyers were saying that, there was no reason for these raids. And it wasn't until there was a certain publication that we can't probably say too much about, but it wasn't until that happened that people actually did start to settle down a bit and start saying, well, actually, was it all the way that the defence lawyers have been portraying it?
And the police do work the media, and I'm one that's done it for years. And if I'm investigating a murder, and if I can get the details out before the public and get my telephone or the detectives' telephones ringing, that's worth weeks of wearing out shoe leather and radial tyres. It's much easier to get the public ringing us by using the media, and I make no apology for that, and I think that the police today don't do enough of it.
You were a master of it, Graham.
Yes. And Auckland is the poorer for not having an afternoon paper for things like that. I mean, we had all the morning to get stuff, and it was a perfect drop for the cops.
I know there'd be a few defence lawyers who'd be pretty unhappy about the police working the media to the extent that you suggest.
Well, they're only jealous that they can't do it. And although they do try, there are names that slip off the tongue pretty easily when you're thinking of defence lawyers, and it's because they're constantly in the media.
If we could go back to the historical rape allegations, because I think that's an important part of the story. Do you think that the police, again, you have police sources, do they believe that there was a cleansing there and that they have moved on?
Look, I think the vast majority of police officers, and I'm only going by the numbers that I speak to, felt that the things that came out of that were probably ultimately to the benefit of the police force. I think that if there is a code of conduct that comes out of it, I think that if the police take on board some of Baisley's recommendations, what disappointed me the most about the outcome of all of that was the attempt by particularly the police association, but that is their job, they're the police union, to try and minimise the outcomes of that Baisley inquiry.
We're talking about Greg O'Connor here, aren't we? Does he actually play a useful role? Because I wonder whether people start to switch off. You know what he's going to say.
I think you do know what he's going to say. He won't come out, and he's far too reluctant to actually say, well, in that case, we screwed up, we're going to take it on the chin, and we're going to move on.
But it's a fact of the age we live in that if the police do step up and say we screwed up, it becomes a political issue. And I wonder if there is political pressure, if there's a risk averseness because of the political nature of policing now.
But I think it only happens when there's been an initial sort of denial of any knowledge of anything. I think I've always found that if you've made a mistake and you front up and say, look, this was a cock-up, we've made a mess of this, people are going to understand and back you to the hilt. Whereas if you say, oh, look, I can't believe we'd have done anything wrong, and then fob everyone off until you're put to the position where you've got no choice but to admit you made a mistake, then people are going to whack you over the head, and you deserve it.
Dominic, is this down to the PR professionals who you now see working in the police? With an old-fashioned police spokesman who simply said, we screwed up?
Yes. It's a more conflictual society today, and I think the function of policing becomes more and more contentious, but, honesty is the best policy. Guys like Ding here operated in that way, and so did his predecessors.
The New Zealand Herald, just before we go to the break, wrote an editorial this week about the Manarewa shooting, which dwelt very heavily on public expectations of the police. What should the public expect of their police force? What are the baseline expectations?
Well, I think they want the police to keep them safe, but the police can't keep other people safe unless they make sure that they're safe themselves first. And that's part of the issue. They expect the police, as a result of all of the things we're talking about now, to act within the procedures that are laid down for them, unless it doesn't suit them at the time. But the police have got no choice. There are so many procedures now, it's mind-boggling, and I don't know how young cops today actually get to learn all these procedures. I never had any idea half of them when I was in the police. So how these young guys today are coping with it all, I've got no idea.
Yeah, well, we'll wrap the discussion up in the third segment, but after the break it's time for something a little lighter in the shape of Newsmash.